I mean, these aren't actually my slides. I just wanted to make sure that they work before I introduce the speaker and use them. For our keynote today, we looked around to find somebody who had been involved, for a number of years in research projects that use cyber infrastructure. Bob Willhelmson seemed a natural person. He will address many of the cyber infrastructure technologies in the form of cyber environments and cyber services that are being developed in partnerships with scientific, engineering, humanities, and social science communities. Robert Willhelmson is the head of the Cyber Applications and Communications Directorate, you can see why he's noticed, at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications. Let's see. And a professor of meteorology at the University of Illinois at Urbana. He's been a scientific lead on many model visualization efforts that depict severe storm and tornado behavior. So without further ado, Bob.
Well, please bear with me today. Somehow last night I concocted the flu or food poisoning, so I'm half here and half not. But I think the slides are going to speak for themselves. I'll try to amplify them a little bit. Usually when I get in front of a group, I get animated, no matter how I feel. So here's just a few visualizations of turbulent flow of storms and biology patterns and turbulence and so forth. And one of the reasons for showing this is to say, as a backdrop, we talk about cyber infrastructure and a number of other terms I'm going to define. And we talk about it sometimes as if it's all technology. And it is technology. But really, the purpose of adapting this technology is to enable and empower scientists, engineers, humanists, and artists. And you notice I've got humanists and artists there. They don't always appear on one's list. Because over the decades, the primary use of high-performance computing, large storage devices, and remote devices has been actually by science and engineering communities. But there's a growing interest in the humanities and in the arts as to what they do with their databases and what they do with their knowledge. Now, here's how I like to characterize the world we live in. It's a lot different than 1966 when I started using supercomputers over the internet at the time to do my computing at UCLA from Illinois. This was the beginning of what I would say is the internet for research, just about that time. There were a few of us who had the opportunity and had lots of money from ARPA to actually purchase time at other sites, such as at UCLA. Since that time, my research and much of research has become multidisciplinary. When we think of earth science, we think of climate, we think of a broad spectrum of experts coming together and bringing models together. We think of multi-scale. I study storms. There's everything from the behavior of hail within the storm to tornadoes to the actual storms themselves. And if you've been listening at all to the weather, you know we've had some interesting events this month, or this past month, and this month. They're multi-purpose. Some of it's for research, some of it's for prediction. This is very true for weather prediction. And some of it's for education. And all of a sudden, there's a challenge to develop a kind of infrastructure that can support all of these. In fact, the way we used to do business was I would submit a card deck in a card reader, and it would travel over the net, end up somewhere, if I was careful not to drop the card deck, by the way. There were those people who took card decks back in the 60s, and they would lift the whole box of cards in one hand and drop it into a tray, and never lose the order of any cards. They got to be so good. Well, that skill has long left us. And It's multi-services. That is, we're not only interested in simulation, we're interested in data collection from field programs and integrating that in with simulation with actually mining the data. And I'll give you some examples in a little while. And let's say creating visualizations, and we want to archive them, and we want to make them available to the national research community or the public. There's multi-resources. There's shared and distributed memory machines. There's innovative hardware like FPGAs, field programmable arrays. There's high-speed networking. There's rotating disk, archival storage. And by the way, I want my laptop to be part of this huge environment in which all the resources that I need exist. So it's not separate, it's integrated in to this environment. I'm going to try to show you some examples later on. It's multi-agency. There's additional pushes at NSF and NASA and DOE to start working together more because until recently, almost everybody did their own thing. But one of the things we learned is working in this multi-world, it's too expensive to do your own thing. You have to work together. And then it's multi-community. Many of the large cyber infrastructure projects, and there's a whole list of them there that you may not know one of them, but I'll try to show you a few in a little while. All of these involve not only interdisciplinary teams, but teams that are spread across the country, not at one place. So, with that, collaboration is needed. And the call that Jennifer just gave us is a call that embodies the fact that innovation is needed when using all of these capabilities. And leadership is needed. And the leadership is not just in some office in Washington, D.C. It's actually in this room. I find more and more people would, like to dabble in what all of this is and would like to use it. And this is exciting to have students who just don't want to walk in and use a black box and crank out a thesis and leave tomorrow. They don't understand the system. They don't understand the science behind it when they do that. Okay, I'm going to give you a number of slides, some my own, some borrowed, just to capture in different ways what we mean by different terms and look at some science and engineering and some of the computer science that goes into cyber infrastructure. And what we are trying to do is capture how the science and engineering, humanities, and arts communities work. But so what if I can repeat what they do? I want to do it 100 times faster. I want to take the grunt work out of what people are doing, and I'm going to give you an example of that later, so that they can concentrate on the science and not on actually shuffling their research data files around. And that's what a lot of students still do. They spend most of their time shuffling things around and not thinking about the science. So, cyber infrastructure involves networking, computers, data storage. That's a simple way to look at it. And it's, in essence, a computer system that involves all of these capabilities. And what's interesting is they're not all at one place. That's what makes this even more difficult and more challenging. There's wireless, there's fields, there's sensors, there's data all over the place. And some of the field experiments are bringing in, or projected to bring in, more data than you can imagine in one day. And it's happening in the next 5 years. So here's another way to look at cyber infrastructure, and this was actually mentioned by Chuck a little bit ago. And the current head of NSF, Art Lament, talks about the scientific toolkit includes cyber infrastructure includes distributed systems of hardware, software, databases, and expertise. So it involves people as well as software and hardware. And in fact, there was a report several years ago, it was the NSF Bloomberg Panel report, that Dan Atkins chaired, that talked about this integrated cyber infrastructure and kind of you know, NSF knew this was coming, but kind of woke them up to the point they did something really dramatic. They created a new office in the director's office. This does not happen in an agency very often. And in fact, there was a lot of thinking that went into that, and there was a lot of resistance to it. But it's happened, and this is excellent. And guess who's heading it up? Dan Atkins, the person who was responsible for this report. And what's exciting is he's not going in with a completely preconceived idea. Yes, he has a whole history of understanding cyber infrastructure, but he is engaging the community. And you'll see that that is happening everywhere these days. Now, it turns out cyber infrastructure has been around for, you know, this whole period and much more. But the kind of cyber infrastructure that talks about integration of all these things on networks really has gotten going only in the last decade and a half. And so here you see a slide from NSF that talks about cyber infrastructure emerging as a key theme in about 2002, although, as I said, it was already there. So, the background report that I referred to before, which you can pick up on the web, and guess what? People are so interested in this. This is a set of reports on cyber infrastructure from all kinds of disciplines and agencies. But there's more. This is only touching the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, in terms of what's being done to define what we need. I'll come back to that in a minute. But before I leave this, NSF is putting together a vision for 21st century discovery using cyber infrastructure. And in fact, their document is on the NSF Cyber Infrastructure website for review, for comment. Well, let's go back and take a slightly different look. What are the cyber infrastructure needs driven by? We're moving from simple to complex systems, and I'll illustrate that later. We want to actually take these pieces of code that are written to help us use this distributed computing system and have the code work all the time. We are still in an area where much of cyber infrastructure is research, and it is not stable and robust like the 5th version of Microsoft Word. We're going from the desktop. We want to do all our work at the desktop or as much as we can, and we want to move to a petaflop system, which is, well, we were a gigaflop not that long ago. We went to teraflop, and now NSF is pushing to the petaflop. So 10 to the 12th floating point operations a second, and more. How do you build a thing like this? How can we, in fact, on a code, use 100,000 processors simultaneously to get your answers? There's all kinds of interesting research problems here. Some of what we want to do will scale this many processors, some will not. And so we'll need other kinds of architectures. We want these systems to be balanced. For example, if I do a storm calculation or weather prediction, I don't want to spend 90% of my time moving the data from memory to disk. I want to spend 10% of my time. So how do we balance? So this is certainly from the code point of view, a major issue. We've got observations and theory and modeling, but hey, all of that's worthless unless we're getting some new knowledge out of it. Are we getting new knowledge out of billions and billions of numbers? Or are they just sitting there giving us no new information except some pretty pictures? And so we're driven by the need to learn something, to simplify, to do something we call data mining. The internet came along, and we had Mosaic, and all of a sudden we democratized the use of the internet. Some of you remember that Mosaic and Internet Explorer and Netscape, where did they come from? It came from the university. It came from the University of Illinois. In fact, it came from NSF'S. Came from a small research group, just doing their own thing in the corner, like Microsoft likes to put out there, Google likes to put out there. And as soon as it hit the floor, 6 months later, there was a million people hopping on board because they saw its power. The power of real-time response. You could find things. But what if I want real-time response? What if there is a bird flu epidemic, and I need real-time response of where it's going, how fast it's going? Well, there is no center that probably has sufficient power to actually do those calculations in many different settings. So the question then becomes, how do I marshal the computing power in the country to do this in a real-time way, where if you're running, your job is gone? Do you ever hear of that in a center that delivers cycles on the orders of tens of teraflops? No, they don't work that way. You get in a batch queue. You wait 3 days, then you get to run. So the way we're using these systems is going to change. And there's so many other changes in terms of data and the ability to do hundreds and thousands of simulations rather than just one. The other thing is we're moving into more collaborative teams, and those teams are getting larger. And there's all kinds of issues with that. How effective are they? What's the social dynamics? Okay, so I borrowed slides from a number of places, and I'm going to give you a slide from Margaret Wyman. Just one. She said cyber infrastructure must serve geoscience. It's not for computer scientists to decide what to do. It's for us to decide what we need them to do. Now, you try to tell a computer scientist that. Who wants to do something new and innovative, that doesn't really work at the end. In a stable, robust, deployable way. We must have partnerships, however, with computer scientists, because as discipline scientists, we do not know all of the intricacies of what's going to take to deliver the functionality that we determine. The next thing is cyber infrastructure. It's expensive. And in fact, Dan Atkins definitely echoes that same sentiment, but there's been a lot of people who've been trying to come up with a very quick elevator speech for what cyber infrastructure is. And this is Dan Atkins in a speech he gave a couple of years after the Blue Ribbon Panel report. And he said, my elevator speech is this: advanced cyber infrastructure is critical to innovation. Innovation is critical to leadership in a global knowledge-based economy. So if you wonder why we're doing this, this embodies the full argument of why we're doing it. There's many, many tentacles to this argument, but it certainly does grab most of the essence of why we're doing this. And the second point here is, he says, his history with civil engineering friends and technology really informs him the cost of building this cyber infrastructure is expensive. And that means partnerships with industry. That means if industry doesn't adopt this, for the most part, it doesn't have a survival path. Then there's this other thing. We're all trying to do it our own way. But we can't all be stovepipe solutions. We actually have to work together and think together. It's a little concept called co-opetition. Industry does this. Boeing and McDonnell Douglas do this on certain particular projects they're working on, where they're both going to benefit, and then they take that benefit back to the other projects that they're working on. Now, here is a conceptualization of everything that a scientist might want to do, at least a scientist like me. I'm over here on the right. I'm trying to do science. I have this portal or this entry point, gateway into the computing world. I have in that computing world private data and public data. I have over here on the left, on the top, I have the ability to search my data. I have the ability to identify what data I have in terms of ontologies and workflows. And then, everybody know what a workflow is? Every day when we go into the office, we do something, and then we do something else, and something else, and something else. Now, it's not always in an order that depends on the previous thing we did, but sometimes it is. That can be defined as a workflow. How do you work? what thing you do first, second, third, fourth, and fifth to reach your objective. So that's workflow. And so we can create workflows that deal with collecting data, steering instruments, then writing data sets, running models, doing the analysis, and so forth. And we can connect these in ways that will enable me as a researcher to get my new frontier research done. In fact, I mentioned that NSF is working on a plan. Let me just quickly show you the chapters in the plan on high-performance computing that hasn't gone away, data analysis, and visualization. Collaboratories working together using the internet too. Observatories and virtual organizations. Virtual organizations are these collections of people all over the country working on projects. And then there is the issue for education and workforce, which is a big issue for us in the US right now. Well, let me step back and take a different look at the world we live in. You're going to see a lot of different views. It's called the cyber view. And you can have a lot of fun with this, because you can think of at least 5 more, probably cyber words that come to mind. But we have cyber infrastructure. We have cyber science, the kind of science enabled by this infrastructure. And then we have these things called cyber services, cyber environments, and cyber communities. And let me tell you what they are. A cyber community is a distributed group of people with common goals. It could be a few people, a lot of people. That's how we define a cyber community. It could be researchers, policymakers, responders, educators, citizens, and so forth. The cyber environment is a subset of general CI capabilities that's tailored for a specific community. Believe me, every community doesn't want the same thing. They want things tailored for them. So, the great challenge is, can we find some common things across all those communities that we can use and stabilize and deploy, and then build specialized capabilities on top to meet the needs of the community. And cyber service is one of the ways we think about putting all of these pieces together. That is, I want to do some data collection, I want to do some data assimilation, getting ready to start up a model, to do the data mining. All those are pieces, and we can cast them as web services or types of services. So now you see I'm starting to talk computer science. Now, you even have more fun if you can read this. One day I said, well, cyber environment is composed of cyber services that enable cyber science within cyber communities. You know, it's how to have some fun when you're sitting in your office from now and then. But the key here is all of this stuff is going on, however you want to look at it. But we're trying to come up with some common terminologies that can be widely understood. In fact, if you look on NCSA's strategic directions, you see cyber resources, which is all of our hardware and the data stores and so forth. You also see cyber environments. Building these cyber environments, prototyping them, takes serious effort and an engagement of the community. Now, I talked about Mosaic before. Let's contrast Mosaic with the cyber environment. You can get at all kinds of things on the internet. You can publish them, it's a wealth of resources, and you have a URL, you go to that URL, you get resources. The cyber environment, however, is something that you just don't get one thing and bring it back. You actually go and do work, and then connect that work with other work in a way that can be used by a broad spectrum of scientists. So it goes way beyond the capabilities of Mosaic. In fact, we talk about web portals, and we talk about access through web portals, whether it be HTML or other kinds of web portals, like Sakai, so forth. Broad access, that provides us broad access to a lot of interesting information. But what if I want to manage all this information and carry out diverse experimental, computational, and data resources? That, in fact, is what we're doing in Cyberenvironment. So here happens to be one. Prototype something called Cleaner, Collaborative Large-Scale Engineering Analysis Network for Environmental Research. It involves taking live data, analyzing it, visualizing it, comparing it against other data, multiple kinds of sensors, linking to computational models, collaborating with colleagues, and then automating the whole research process so you all know what's going on, or all can change what's going on. There's another one that we're involved in, earthquake engineering. Okay, so maybe your first question is, can we predict the earthquake? We're not working on that basis. Storms, we're working on that basis. Can we predict the storms? But earthquakes, yeah, we might have an indication there might be one. But here, the issue is how do I respond to one if it exists? Focus here is on Memphis. What if roads go out? What if a whole bunch of things go out? Where do I direct people? Who's still functional, etc.? What kind of system can you build to collect all this data and then put it together for decision makers in a way that they can, in fact, use a variety of models and decision support systems to come up with an optimal solution. What I'm saying when I'm talking about cyber environments is we have to know the community that we're building for. In fact, we have to look at what they're doing, and we have to look at what they want to do that can't do today. We have to look at both things. In other words, it's not just us going off in the corner and doing some fun stuff. It's us directing our work towards what they're doing. And there's various ways of doing that. What do they want in data management? What do they want in analysis framework? What kind of collaborative framework do they want in order to enable discovery and analysis and so forth? So one of the ways of looking at this is, as I mentioned before, is you start on the bottom, and you start with computing resources and basic services, like moving data from one site to another. And then you start going up to certain application services, like organizing your tasks. And then you go up to the top, and every community is going to do something a little different there. But they're all using some of the tools down below. Now, there's lots of ways of looking at this. Here is a computer science picture of the same thing. You see all kinds of words on here. This is for a particular project that we're working on, a way to get weather forecasts where weather simulations run across the grid, the carrier grid, and other parts of the grid, and collecting all the data and making improved forecasts. So you see all kinds of things: who can get on the system, how's the system monitored, etc. How's the workflow handled? And this is actually Kelvin Rodemeyer put this slide together of his view of the world. And his view of the world is when you see foundational user tools, those are all tools that I know what they are in my field. Okay? They're not these generic names on the previous slide. So you take that previous slide and all of a sudden you bring it down to a way that my community can understand. And so you go from meteorology to CS, and then hopefully at the end, you get new knowledge and understanding. Here's something from BIRN, the Biomedical Information Research Network. This looks similar. Almost everyone in building these cyber infrastructures and cyber environments has that diagram, showing you what's common and what's unique. And often they're put together in terms of a concept we call web services. And this is a concept which, you simply ask a question like, get last trade price for SGI. This is not today, by the way. I think SGI is below $1. Then there's some code that's called that actually then goes and returns the price. And so you have a network service that provides a functional interface for remote clients. In other words, you want a task done, you have to have a way to talk to that task and then get your information back. When we wrote Fortran, we were in total control. But now these services are not Fortran. There can be all kinds of things. There can be JavaScript, all kinds of, it can be models. And so we need nice interfaces so that we can pull in these services like running a model without having to get into the model itself. So there's all kinds of things here. I'm just going to skip this over. And there's various ways to graphically determine what we're doing. And there's rapid prototype environments, such as the one that's been developed at NCSA, called Data to Knowledge. And it's all part of the knowledge discovery process and how you go from data selection and cleaning to prep to transformation to looking at that data, so forth. And there's all kinds of advantages for using a system like this, including the fact that what if a graduate student or a researcher could spend 80% of their time on science and only 20% on groundwork instead of the other way around? And in reality, there's a number of illustrations of what can be done. I'm going to look at this last one, new advances through InfoViz. Here it is, something done in at least prototyping in 2 or 3 weeks because this tool existed, to visualize the chromosomes from a number of species, horses, cats, dogs, to look for what they call breakpoints or similarities in terms of breaks in the sequences. I remember sitting in Harris's office and him saying, when one of our people was there, to his graduate student, just keep doing it by hand. In about 6 months, we would have it. 2 weeks later, Michael walked back in the room and said, here's how to do it. Here's an example of what you can do. He turned to his graduate student and said, stop doing it by hand. And it's a big deal now with the science article, because you can visually compare these the chromosomes. There's exciting things happening all the time. Just last month or so, the first simulation of an entire life form was completed using an atomic-based molecular code called NAMBI. And it's the smallest virus, not a standalone virus, but it's called a satellite tobacco mosaic. It includes about 1 million atoms. How does he do this? He needs visualization. He needs ways to keep his job running and so forth, to get the sufficient time to complete the process. So, coming back to the fact that there's unprecedented planning, the ocean community, I know Dale's here, who was involved in this, put together a report a few years ago about what that community needs. And it's listed here. Provide models, data and software, curatorship, improve access to high-performance computing facilities, etc. Well, there was one done in atmospheric science that says get human resource issues top priority. Reward people working in this area. And another one was fund the entire software lifecycle. One that's more recent is build a petascale computer, because we have so many problems that require such high-performance computing that it's time to build one. This is a report that came out about 6 months ago. There are a number of efforts around the country to develop these community-based cyber environments. LEAD is one of them that happens to involve 9 universities, and we're trying to look at better prediction of weather and to actually dynamically respond to the weather as it's going on. What if the squall line gets bigger and bigger and bigger? I need more and more computing power. How do I get that? So I'm going to my cyber environment is going to dynamically adapt and give me more right when I need it. And so this, I'm just going to quickly show you this because you've got streaming observations. Many of you might not know that there is a project to put radar on cell towers. Why? Because normal radar can't see below 1 kilometer, but half a mile, not half a mile, quarter of a mile above. Okay? So you're going to have all of these steerable electronic radars sitting on. They're not going to be mechanical anymore. They're all going to be electronic. So where do you look? You can't look everywhere at once. So we're going to be running models and algorithms to tell the radars where to look, then to take that data, put it into a model, and then try to improve our forecasting, and then visualize the results, and keep doing this over and over and over. So we're identifying, accessing, preparing, assimilating, predicting, managing, analyzing, mining, visualizing data. And yeah, it takes a big breath to say all those things, but that's the level of challenge in building cyber infrastructure. There are many projects. Here's just a brief list. I'm not going to go into them. We've already heard a little bit about the smokers and taking video underwater. There are efforts, and I'm just going to flip through these, in chemistry. There's efforts in molecular science, across scales. across algorithms that run at different scales. There are simulations of the early part of the universe. And what happens is, as the mass collects in certain regions, you've got to have higher resolution, so we're putting down more boxes like Norman is. Pretty soon, there are 23 nests of boxes, one within the other. How do you visualize that? Most people know how to visualize some GIS data or some regularly gridded data. So there's challenges here that we're addressing. The Biomedical Information Research Network, looking at integrating the activities of advanced biomedical imaging and establishing distributed and linked data collections. Even if the data collections aren't large, it is important that researchers across the country have access to it and know that it exists. And I won't go into any more. Here are the BIRN sites. Key of the BIRN sites, in fact, we saw a picture of this, or it's in your handout. Now, this is the shocker. The new astronomy instrument being planned. 15 terabytes a day. Okay. Well, you know, we can go out and buy a 10 terabyte disk store that's slow and put it on our desk now for $100,000. How are we going to deal with 15 terabytes a night raw data and 130 terabytes of process data from there? Where's it all going for 5 years? So this is one of the challenges in building some of these new instruments that will look at issues of dark energy and so forth. I've already mentioned cleaner, and there's a lot of information here which I won't take time to go through, except to say that cleaner is just like weed. It wants to create hypotheses, obtain data, you assimilate that data into models, and analyze the results, discuss the results, and publish the results. Run people can get in. Here's the mission statement that was put together for the National Institute of General Medical Sciences. Intended we want every person involved in the biomedical enterprise to have instant access to all data sources, analysis tools, modeling tools, visualization tools, and interpretive materials necessary to do the job. Okay. That is a grand challenge. If we do it in 10 years, it will be remarkable. But it is a goal to shoot for. And it becomes more and more important as we try to improve medicine and our use of medicine, and when it will work and when it won't work. So there's lots of issues with biomedical computing tools, which I've indicated here. There's biological computing, which spans a broad set of scales, requiring different amounts of computing power and involving complexity across the bottom axis. There's industrial needs for high-performance computing and for data mining in a lot of areas, such as crash safety, lifeblood, flowing in terms of boosting oil and gas recovery, and so forth. So, now, some of you have heard of the TeraGrid. It's one of the first instantiations of a high-speed backbone between computer sites. It is something put in place by NSF as an experiment to look at how we might best use such computing capabilities and network capabilities. So we're always kind of one step ahead. Lambda Rail fits into this also in terms of moving data. So I think what I want to say and kind of close things out here is quickly, I know you can't read it this fast, but you'll probably make the slides available for you to look at. So what we're talking about with cyber infrastructure is more than just computing on a grid. It's research, it's deployment, and the tension between the two, and the ability to learn new information so that we can make wiser choices, develop better products, and make new discoveries about how our world works. And just to give you an idea about how many projects there are going on, here's just a few. One of the great challenges is how these interface with one another. So, I don't know what time it is, but I think I'm running out of steam. So, I'd be happy to answer a few questions.